our network just very shortly, and then the floor is yours completely.
Thank you.
We can start. We are live and recording.
Dear guests, dear keynote speakers, dear participants, I am very happy to open this webinar, this online event, which is dedicated to feminist foreign policy. I know that in this very difficult time that we are living, this might not appear as an important issue. I would argue that on the contrary, this is essential. Women need to participate in decision making because we are half of the population of the globe, and our voices need to be heard, and not only heard, but also acted upon. Because sometimes decisions taken only by males might not be the best ones. So I would just like to say 2 words about our network. We are a network of ladies, of women experts in international relations and in connected areas. We gather experts from Eastern, Southeastern Europe, including the Black Sea region. We are a network set up by the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration in partnership with the Black Sea Trust for Regional Cooperation of the German Marshall Fund. Having said that, I am sure that this event is going to be a very informative and illuminating event. I am very happy that Mrs. Ramona Avramescu, who is a media person, a senior media person, agreed to be our moderator, and I would like to give her the floor to moderate the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Popescu. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really invigorating to be here for a news journalist like me, who in the last week was dealing only with breaking news and awful stories from the war. So that's a nice change. And I'm looking forward to hear all our keynote speakers talk. And that being said, I would like to start abruptly this discussion because the time is pressing us, giving the floor to Mrs. Mihea Diculescu-Blebea, who is a Director for Diplomatic Strategies and Policy Planning in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mrs. Diculescu-Blebea, thank you for being with us today. And I'm sorry for starting the talk very undiplomatically, I'm afraid, but I'm a journalist and I'm used to put my finger on the wound. So I will start by stating the obvious. Our government has very, very few women in top level decision-making positions. So I'm sorry to have to say that, but it seems rather exotic to even have a conversation about a feminist foreign policy. So if you please share your assessment with us, and how can we have a conversation about this under these circumstances? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hello to everyone. I hope you all hear me. Thank you for inviting the ministry and inviting me to participate to this webinar. Please allow me, before answering your question, to say just a few words that come as completion to what Professor Popescu just said. Evolutions are exceptionally dramatic in our region, and talking about the role of women in foreign policy now, when the situation of so many women plays a key role in foreign policy decision these days, seems to me highly relevant. just a few words about me. I've been joining the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2002, so 20 years ago now. I started as a young diplomatic attaché. Today, as you said, I'm the Director for Diplomatic Strategies since September last year. I would like to try to answer your question, but as you understand, I cannot refer to the political decision that decisions that the government, the Romanian government, for example, the composition of the government is about. I can give you a perspective of an institutional perspective of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and share with you some of the preoccupations and of the situation that the ministry looks like today concerning, let's say, gender balance, human resources, policies, and so on. So if you allow me, I would briefly tackle on that. Before 1990, you all know the role of women in the Romanian society was ideologically legitimated. Women almost did not exist as foreign policy professionals. They were overwhelmingly secretaries, assistants of the managing level. For example, in the late 80s, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Socialist Romanian Republic, we had only one woman ambassador of diplomatic ranking. After 1990, the number of women constantly increased through the regular recruitment sessions. The recruitments were not gender targeted, but organized for offering fairly equal chances in compliance with the criteria of competence, of performance, and professionalism requested by a diplomatic career. Young Romanian women proved to be more systematic in preparing those exams. They proved to be more foreign languages skilled, so they got the jobs. Currently, we have 49.49, so half of the total employees of the Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs are women. And out of the total number of people holding managing positions in the headquarters here in Bucharest, for example, women represent 53.6% at all levels and in all departments. Please allow me to point out here that the Romanian MFA exceeds by 18.6% that the target of 40% of women in management positions settled within the European External Action Service by the end of mandate of High Representative Borrell. So we are in a very, very good position in this point. Specifically, of the 5 state secretaries that we currently have in the ministry, 2 positions are held by women. The position of Secretary General is also held by a woman. In addition to that, both government officials for the Court of Justice of the European Union and for the European Court of Human Rights are also women. I was talking about the headquarters. Concerning now the Foreign Service, women represent 33.7% of the total number of persons appointed as head of mission. So we also have a very good number here. I feel that, if you allow me to say, this situation is good one, what gender balanced representation of men and women concerns within the ministry. And all this contributed, if I may say so, to a more creative, a smart and a sophisticated note in our foreign policy. It's a normality, it's a matter of routine, having men and women working together at all levels of decision making in the ministry. And it's also constant preoccupation for the institution and for Minister Aurescu personally to keep in mind this principle of equal access of women to a fully fledged diplomatic career. So coming back to your question, I cannot talk about the whole Romanian government, but concerning the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, women are very well represented. They are very involved in the decision making. They have fully fledged diplomatic careers. They try to combine, and all diplomats in the world can confirm this. They try to have this balance, which is so needed between personal life and professional life. And in the last 2 decades, things have changed, improved, they come to a very good balance within the institution. And I would like to conclude that diplomatic staff, Romanian diplomatic staff, is very creative, very smart, very sophisticated concerning this, trying to balance all this and bringing every time a very good and smart and innovative position that our times request. I'm sorry, I cannot hear you now.
We cannot hear you, Ramona. We cannot hear you.
I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you for this precise data that you've shared with us. And I can say, as a journalist for 20 years now, that I've actually met some very smart women diplomats and experts, very creative, as you said, and actually brilliant in their work. And I can only hope that at the general level of the government and of society, involving women in high level decision making will follow the example of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Her Excellency Mrs. Therese HYDEN, Ambassador of Sweden in Romania, a diplomat with a very impressive career, experience in Turkey, Central Asia, but also EU, with focus on human rights and international law and migration. Mrs. HYDEN represents a country that made head titles in 2014, when was the first country that actually adopted the idea of a feminist foreign policy. So, Your Excellency, please tell us more about that.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Abramescu, and thank you to the SNSPA, Professor Popescu, dear colleagues, everyone listening in, State Secretary Luminița Popescu, academic colleagues from Poland, Romania, Poland, Turkey, and including hopefully then my own country, Sweden. She's waving, she's there at least. Let's hope we can get her on. Yeah, it's working. Perfect. I need to excuse myself a little bit. I have a little bit of COVID right now, but I wouldn't want to miss this seminar. So I prepped myself with some pills, but I feel not 100% myself, but I'm with you as much as I can this afternoon, because I don't want to miss the opportunity to speak about this topic. First, I do need to say a few words about Ukraine. I think it's important at any point reiterate the the atrocities and how Sweden and Romania, together with the EU and large parts of the world, condemn the current ongoing attacks on Ukraine, affecting the entire population, not only women and children, but those are also victims that we now see over the border in Romania. I think we've seen a lot of solidarity on behalf of Romania, both the authorities and the civil society is really helping out. I think we are seeing now a different world where the attack is not just on Ukraine as a country, it's on entire Europe and the democracy in the Western world as we have regarded it today. So it is quite a paradigm shift. Why is it then important to speak about the feminist foreign policy? Well, I think Professor Popescu already alluded to that in the beginning. The decision-making tables as we hopefully move out of this conflict. I will just do this little thing here. You can't really see it, but it's a picture of the first, I wouldn't properly want to call it negotiations, but with the Ukrainian and the Russian sides, and they are all 4 men sitting on each side of the table. I will just leave that picture with you as I start my my intervention regarding the feminist foreign policy. And as it was already said, this was the idea of our former Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Margot Wallström, in 2014. And 3 weeks ago, the current Minister for Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Ann Linde, reiterated the feminist foreign policy in the Swedish foreign policy declaration to the parliament. So it's still very much the basis for Swedish foreign policy. So what has happened during these 8 years since? Well, we're very glad that we have formally been joined by a number of countries adopting their own feminist foreign policies. We have Canada, France, Luxembourg, Spain, Mexico, and I think the latest country to join is Germany. So the interest and curiosity regarding this policy and this work is indeed growing. And let me just say as a start also that feminist foreign policy, it's not window dressing, it's not an add-on, it's not an instead of another foreign policy. It is a perspective. It's a policy to mobilize, to steer and ensure that foreign policy always takes into account the role of women and gender equality. That's the essence of it. And I'll speak more about this later. I also want to share during my minutes now some insights on why and how the feminist foreign policy in Sweden and beyond has been successful. So the feminist foreign policy is essentially structured around three R's: rights, representation, and resources. So rights is about promoting the human rights of women and girls, including working against violence, working against discrimination. The representation issue is precisely about having women represented at all levels, including in civil society and at the top decision-making levels. Resources is obviously about making sure that women have access to resources, that their resources are allocated to promote gender equality, but also to all types of decision-making levels. All of these R's should also be based on the reality, because realities will change and the policy needs to develop, taking that into account. So over these 8 years in Sweden, what has happened, of course, is that we have developed handbooks. There's a handbook on feminist foreign policy. It's, I think, available in several languages by now. We have our own action plans, resources, and not least, a lot of scientific data. And I mention this because we really do, in order to be able to have policy, we kind of need to find out first what is the situation and then create the policy. So we had to start to look for the statistics. What do they say about the disparities between men and women, boys and girls, in terms of legislation, education, marriage, inheritance, all important questions. To have the good statistics and data is really key to have a good feminist foreign policy. We also have clear targets. We have targets set for 2019 to 2022. They include everything from the full enjoyment of human rights, participation in conflict prevention, conflict resolving, post.
I think we have a problem with the connection with Her Excellency. Maybe we can redo the connection. If everyone can hear me.
There we go. Okay, we're back. Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks. I want to share some examples of what the feminist foreign policy in Sweden has actually led to. A few years back, Sweden was a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. What we did then, and what I think has been the lasting practice since then, is to have invited a number of women representatives, organizations, to take the floor and give their views and information to the Security Council. That was not the case before, and I think since then a lot more women's voices have been heard in the UN Security Council. Another example is that Sweden was the chair of the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, during last year. During that year, Mrs. Ann Linde, the foreign minister, was very adamant on ensuring that a women's issue, gender equality, women, peace and security was included in as many different areas of work of the OSCE as possible. We also have a feminist trade policy. Women's economic power is really essential to gender equality. We have established a network of female mediators that can be used in different conflict contexts. And like I mentioned also, we try and increase the financial support to women's organizations. We also try to champion sexual and reproductive rights around the world. So having said this, it's perhaps important also to state that really the full enjoyment of human rights for women and girls is in the mind of Mrs. Margot Wallström, who came up with the feminist foreign policy, is really the unfinished business of the last century. And I think that's fair to say that it's a business that we will carry with ourselves also in this century. But how come it was possible in Sweden? How come it's stuck? And also, why was it possible in Sweden? I think there we were predisposed in a way to gender equality. I would say that all Swedish government, regardless of political affiliation and color, in the last decades have had a clear position, positive view on gender equality. So in one sense, it wasn't entirely new. Gender equality has been part of foreign policy before the feminist foreign policy. But what happened with the feminist foreign policy was that it was really, it really made the difference when you capture it in a few words like that. Also, it was indeed a very dedicated policy work, and it was also a learning curve for the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. There was indeed a very strategic approach to staffing and to training. We heard from the colleague from the Romanian Ministry for Foreign Affairs that has taken clearly a dedicated view on increasing the number of women in management positions. The same thing happened in Sweden, and we do have now close to 50%, almost also at ambassadors level. Also for all of us as diplomats and parts of the foreign service, we had to take some mandatory training, particularly at the management level. We have also since 2014 a dedicated ambassador for the feminist foreign policy. There's a network amongst all Swedish missions abroad, together with the headquarters in Stockholm. And basically the result of all this is that we have, all us diplomats are by now pretty much trained to view all our work through the lens of a feminist foreign policy, through a gender lens, if you will, and to take an integrated and strategic approach on these issues, regardless of the work. And I can testify that also to the work we do here at the Swedish Embassy in Bucharest. The gender equality and feminist foreign policy is indeed one of our priority areas that goes into all our work. And I think it's clear also, that was pointed out, this is work also needed in all our countries. I share what was said about the situation in Romania, and it's ongoing work. And what you do here in the FANEL network, I think, is very important. This is an area which is also often regarded as exclusive to men because it's security policy. That is in reality certainly not the case. So how come the feminist foreign policy became successful? I'm coming towards the end of what I want to share with you now. I think there were mainly two reasons why it was successful. First of all, it was communicated in a very clear manner. The examples were there, and the statistics and data were there. I think that helped all of us to see that the feminist foreign policy actually made sense. It made sense to all of us. Also, feminist foreign policy actually has a little bit for everyone. And let me expand a little bit on that, because I think one reaction that has been here towards a feminist foreign policy is that by having that, you exclude something else. Let me give an example. If you work with, let's say, disarmament policies, you might not immediately see what's the link to a feminist foreign policy. And you might think that, if someone comes and say, I'm going to work with a feminist foreign policy, what happens to my important work about nuclear disarmament? Well, I'd say nuclear disarmament is equally important, but it's your job or my job, if I have that task, to see what are the implications for women, what are the links, who takes the decision about nuclear disarmament policies, etc. That's the way to use the feminist foreign policy. It's not to take away any of the other work that we actually do as diplomats, all the other topics that are on the agenda, but it is to use this perspective and this way of looking at things. So I hope that is useful as we move forward. Of course, like I said, there were a lot of reactions. People laughing about a feminist foreign policy in the beginning, but I think clearly the fact that it has caught on in a number of countries goes to explain that it actually has a lot of relevance. This is what I will finish by saying. I think what it does take in order to actually be able to move forward with the feminist foreign policy is a strong political will and a strong political leadership, that you want to do this. It does take courage to reach to that point. It does take patience to move on, and also the policy needs to be rather clear and context specific. And again, I want to underline, how it needs to be based on scientific approach, on experience, on good examples, to show that gender equality actually benefits the society as a whole, that it doesn't take away anything from anyone, but it's actually beneficial for our societies as such. And it will take conviction for governments. I do believe it is an uphill struggle for this region, and that doesn't mean it's not needed. On the contrary, I want to encourage everyone here to dive into this. I hope this will be a very useful discussion to carry on with this work. And I will finish just by mentioning a quote that I think summarizes a little bit what we've gone through, partly with the feminist foreign policy. First, it appears laughable. Second, it is fought against. Third, it is considered self-evident. We're not there yet, but perhaps we're on the way. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your presentation and for taking the time to be with us. I do hope your health gets better and you come over this COVID. Moving on, Mrs. Luminița Popescu is with us, Deputy Minister and Head of the Agency for Equal Opportunity of Romania, an institution which promotes the principle of equal opportunities for women and men, and aims, of course, to combat all forms of gender bias discrimination. Mrs. Popescu, thank you for being with us today. I will go further from something that Ambassador HYDEN said earlier, that in implementing feminist foreign policy, Sweden was predisposed for gender equality. Tell us what's the Romanian perspective?
Thank you. Your Excellency, distinguished guest, Professor Liliana Popescu, the organizers, thank you so much for inviting me to this event with such an interesting topic. I'm glad to see here personalities I collaborated with, Her Excellencies Mrs. Therese HYDEN, and meet new people. I'd like to tell you that I prepared my speech before the war started in Ukraine. These days, I've been thinking about how I could reshape what I wrote, but what I wanted to say remains the same, and it seems more relevant in this state of turmoil we are living in. What is happening in Ukraine is a tragedy, first of all for the citizens of Ukraine, but also for us, for humanity, for the democratic values that many nations of the world, including Romania, have defended. We must resist, and I'm convinced that we will, but we must act in such a way as to limit human losses. I have big hopes when I see how much solidarity we are capable of, feel the power of a global civil society that says no to war, and also the determination and unity of the European Union and NATO. I hope that after these hard times, the liberation will reach even the Russian citizens, and I hope that it will be the end of an era that should have been long gone. Coming back to the topic of our discussion today, it is well known that we still live in a world where gender inequalities are normal for our everyday life. These inequalities are complex, diverse, and sometimes subtle, and unfortunately present in all fields. Even if there are some fields in which the masculine domination remained prevailed until the very recent past, one of them is the international relations. The international relations are still seen as a male playground, and are dominated by a hegemonic masculinity, which is presented as opposed and more valuable, more valid than the subordinated feminities.
Due to stereotypical, patriarchal, and traditional thinking, which opposes to strong, brave, public, rational men, the weak, fearful, private, emotional women, but also due to the influence of the realistic perspective in international relations. Women have not been seen as appropriate to the discipline, and as a result, the knowledge gained from their experiences remained at the periphery of the discipline's analysis. In this context, several questions become legitimate. Whose interests are represented by the state at the international level in these conditions, especially for men? Can men considerably represent women's interests? Do women have anything to do with war, peace, and security? And if so, what is their involvement? Should we also take into account the differences between women? I consider the contribution of feminist theorists to a more impartial and considerable understanding of the world. In the field of international relations, I would summarize the major contribution by challenging the traditional ways limited to war, peace, men, women, independent, dependent, strong, vulnerable differences. We all know about war situations that have targeted systematic actions against women in the enemy state. Situations when their vulnerability and need for protection are speculated and turned into an advantage on the battlefield. See, for example, rape as a military strategy. I would also like to mention the critical analysis regarding the distinction of civilian combatants when we refer to the losses suffered in the absence of peace and security. Feminist research has shown that there is no direct link between the number of female soldiers in battlefields and the number of female victims. It is estimated that in contemporary conflicts, women and children represent 90% of the civilian casualties. To all these tragedies, we must add post-conflict effects such as hunger or diseases that mainly affect women and children. We should also talk about women refugees and displaced persons. We come to another major contribution of feminist intervention in the field of international relations, namely the notion of peace, which must no longer be understood only structurally, only in the absence of conflict, but in terms of the effects on the security of individuals in their daily lives. And when it comes to everyday life, feminist perspectives on international relations have also drawn our attention that besides the women who fall victim during wars, we also have other female victims, namely those who are affected by so-called peacetime. And what better example than the fact that most women globally die as a result of gender-based violence. Isn't this kind of violence a threat to state security? How much do states matter in the discourse on security? States as abstract, symbolic entities, nations in the sense of imaginating communities. And how much do citizens, women and men matter? And even if men may be affected after the war, women are much more affected. The critical analysis of the construction of states is also what I understand by feminist foreign policy, more precisely in the word of Carol Batman, about states built on the images and the interests of male citizens on a model that is defined in terms of order, discipline, and internal harmony in relation to external disorder and threats. Last, but not least, in the current context in which we can speak of a revitalization of ultranationalism, populism, and illiberal movements, I must bring into question the symbolic construction of the nation. Especially in the eyes of conservative and populist men, Women play a key role in the survival and consolidation of nations because they are the bearers of the next generation. They are also the main means for transmitting national values from generation to generation. That is why the nation is also called homeland, blood, home, motherland, while the state is associated with masculinity, strength, violence, fairness. The implication of such discursive configuration can be very problematic, and unfortunately Romania has a dramatic recent history that is right under the sign of this critical analytical construction, and I'm referring here to Ceausescu's pronatal policy. Can we consider pronatal or antenatal policies which take the bodies of women as security threats? I would say yes. More specifically, as for the work of National Agency for Equal Opportunities between Women and Men on promoting a gender perspective in the area of peace and security policies, I'd like to point out that the agency is a part of the National Implementation Group that monitors the implementation of the provisions for National Action Plan attached to a national strategy regarding the implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution, Women, Peace and Security 2020-2023. Our role is mainly to promote and raise awareness of gender issues with an emphasis of elements related to harassment, but also to create networks and partnership to facilitate the implementation of the measures taken through the strategy. In this respect, you can see on the slide that during the reporting period, January-December 2021, at the level of the National Agency for Equal Opportunities between Women and Men, the actions that we implemented in order to apply the measures and achieve the indicator within the strategies, promotion of women, peace and security national plan in the context of the works of the 64th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, CSW. Also in partnership with the Romanian Institute for Human Rights, we organized a webinar on institutional cohesion to promote women's rights and combat violence. And we launched the first version of the practical guide on moral harassment at the workplace and promoted an awareness campaign, Moral Harassment at the Workplace. The participation at the international event, Women's Participation U.S. Military Culture, organized by the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security. In order to accomplish permanent exchange of knowledge and experiences with national and international women, peace and security, civilian experts, the agency assumed two commitments corresponding to Romanian's foreign policy objectives in the field of equal opportunities and treatment between women and men and the prevention and combating domestic violence. Respectively, joining the Coalition for the Action on the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls and the Coalition for Action Supporting Feminist Movements and Women's Leadership. We contributed to the virtual photographic exhibition, Not a Women's Job, at the occasion of the International Labour Day, United Nations, Geneva. These are just a few examples. As a conclusion, I reconfirm my commitment to promoting gender equality, so much needed in a democratic society. You will always find in me a partner ready to listen and understand and use all the means to help build a better world for women as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Popescu, for this presentation. Moving on now to, let's say, more academic.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear
Yes,
you.
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your attention.
I was saying, moving on to a more academic approach, today is with us Professor Agnieszka GRAFF, a professor at the American Studies Center in University of Warsaw, highly reputation scholar with interests and research in gender studies, feminist history, nationalism, public discourse on gender. Also a fierce feminist activist, active participant of Polish Women Congress, as well as feminist protests. Professor Graff, thank you. You have the floor. Maybe tell us about some practical things on a practical level, how a feminist foreign policy could be implemented in Eastern and Southeastern Europe, because we've had the Sweden example. Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored. I'm also very honored to have been recommended by a feminist scholar who is really the mother, if I may use that word, of a foreign policy perspective within feminism. I'm no expert in foreign policy, but it's been many years since I read Cynthia Enlow's Bananas, Beaches, and Bases, which is a wonderful book, which really made the feminist scholarly community aware of the implications of feminism for foreign policy, the links between gender and militarization, and also the complicated feminist history in relationship to foreign policy. And I was very glad to hear perspectives that do not show any interest in equating feminism with pacifism, for instance, which was a very strong trend in the past. And I think that would be a terrible mistake today, to think in those terms. I would like to respond to the speakers before me with a, not perhaps I'll disappoint you. It won't be a very practical bit of advice. I know I think that came from the Swedish ambassador. I want to really turn the tables on the question and convince you that there is something going on, or has been going on for the last decade at least, which can be called an anti-feminist foreign policy on a global scale. And that the task of feminists in foreign policy is to be aware of how it works, to be very careful not to be fooled by it, and to think of responses, and also to convince people who are not feminists and maybe not women in foreign policy to pay attention to what is going on. The speakers so far have used the word gender in a way that I think is very widespread in European Union and in most state feminist contexts. In other words, governments of Western European countries which take up feminism tend to use the word gender to mean women. And I think it's an interesting phenomenon for someone who studies gender and the history of feminism. In some ways, it's a misconception. In some ways, it's very useful. But in some ways, it has also created big problems. And it's really the big problem that I want to address without accusing anyone of doing anything wrong. It's something that I've been looking at as a scholar for the last 10 years. And the book, which I will be summarizing extremely briefly for you, which just came out with Routledge, and it is in open access, so you can download a chapter or two. It's co-authored by myself and Elżbieta Korolczuk, and it's called The Anti-Gender Politics in the Populist Moment. And it's basically a study of the phenomenon known as anti-gender campaigns, which have been happening on the global scale since around 2008, and have also been studied in terms of case studies. And I want to flash another book which is extremely useful, and the country case studies are fascinating and very different, and probably the one we should really be rereading today is the one on Russia. because the anti-gender campaigns are basically state policy in Russia. And I think this is significant as we see what is going on in Ukraine. I guess by way of introduction, also, I wanted to say that I am in Warsaw right now, and I don't know anyone who is not involved in helping Ukrainians. It's basically like a national uprising. Everybody is housing, packing boxes, going to the border. About 300,000 Ukrainians have come to Poland. And of course, the vast majority of them are women and children. So we are dealing with crowds and individual families of women and children who are direct victims of Putin's regime. And with what I guess a feminist analysis would call a fascist toxic masculinity, because masculinity plays an enormous role in what is going on. And there are some fascinating studies of how right-wing populism bordering on fascism, and I think now increasingly slipping into fascism, is implicated in masculinity. I can talk about this later if you want me to, but I do want to talk about the anti-gender campaigns. The campaigns, and I'm sure you have all seen bits and pieces of them, have been strongest in Eastern Europe, but they actually are a global phenomenon. The organizations that are involved in spreading the message that gender is a danger to families, that gender is a danger to children, that children are being sexualized, that there is such a thing as a gender ideology, as a gender agenda. I'm using their language to bring this home to you. And maybe two examples will be very familiar. One is the attacks on the Istanbul Convention, which have been happening at least since 2012. That's when it started in Poland. I think in Romania, it's around the same time. This was a massive campaign which claimed that the Istanbul Conventions against violence against women, this is a European convention, is actually a Trojan horse through which the West wants to impose its values on other countries, and specifically on Eastern Europe. And the instigators of these campaigns have been more successful in some countries. For instance, some countries basically withdrew from the Istanbul Convention, I think including Turkey. Some were very close to withdrawing, but did not withdraw, like Romania and Poland. But in all the countries where these campaigns were waged, there was this intense propaganda going on that linked resistance to gender inequality in the realm of violence with a threat to national sovereignty. Another example, or this is a big set of examples, but I just want to give one that that will be familiar to those of you who are in Romania. In June 2020, the Romanian parliament proposed a law banning the use of the word gender and discussions of gender identity in educational contexts in Romania. I followed that closely. The scholar, thanks to my friendship with this Romanian scholar, Maria Bucur, and it was very interesting to see the rising resistance against this idea. And you will probably all know this better than I do, how it happened. But anyway, in December, this law was struck down by the Constitutional Court ruling, which claimed that this law was actually against the Romanian constitution and that it broke Romanian international. Would you like to intervene? I'm sorry, Liliana.
Actually, I just wanted to say that I was part of the team who resisted from the academical point of view, and we rallied about 830 academics and academic institutions worldwide. Just that, to say, I know many things about that, but maybe we can talk at a later date at some point. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to bring it home, bring this example up because I'm sure you were all involved, but there are hundreds of examples. What we're dealing with is a massive campaign, a worldwide campaign, which has a structure, which has a history, and which has goals. And these goals, I think, can now be linked to the ongoing invasion on Ukraine. And I hope I'm not sounding like a madwoman here. I'll try to make an argument that will convince you of this. So
Definitely, I mean, I'm on your side. I fully
Thank you.
agree what you're saying.
Yeah,
I'm very
it's
curious.
easy
Yeah.
examining these phenomena, which are partly based on conspiracy theories. When you're describing them, it's easy to start sounding like you believe in conspiracy theories yourself. And I went through that stage, and it's kind of scary. Like, you think you're going crazy seeing these strange connections, but the connections are actually there. There is a set of worldwide organizations, all of which have local branches, which are involved in these in the vilification of gender as an idea, and with attacking specific laws, mostly international laws concerning the equality of women. And these organizations include Citizen Go, which is a huge online platform with over 50 million participants doing petition drives. The World Congress of Families, founded in the mid-90s by Russians and Americans. And if you look at the history of the World Congress of Families, there are very interesting moments, especially during the Crimean invasion, how the reactions of the World Congress of Families show that, you know, we're not dealing with people with just religious fundamentalists who don't like gender. We're dealing with very savvy politicians who are getting the money, who are being funded by Kremlin and by the religious right in the United States. And I think that connection between religious fundamentalists in America and Kremlin, and the Kremlin supporting ultra rich people in Russia is very interesting. Another very interesting hub of the anti-gender movement is an organization called Tradition Family Property, Traditio Familia Propriedade, which was started in Brazil in the 60s, a self-proclaimed defender of Catholicism against communism. And they have branches in Eastern Europe, the most powerful of which is Ordo Iuris in Poland, also active in Croatia. It would be very interesting if they're also active in Romania. I have my suspicions that there are other organizations which are actually a kind of dress-up version of Ordo Iuris. And finally, a shadowy organization called Agenda Europe, which was this was a very interesting moment in the gender wars. A few years ago, a specialist from the European European Union agency on equality named Neil Data actually uncovered this group, which then claimed that they had never been secret, but they clearly had been secret. And this was basically diplomats, very rich people, very religious people from all over the world, meeting, setting up home in Brussels, and with a plan which has been published. So I'm not not going to quote it to you, but the plan was basically to dismantle the European Union's policy on gender equality, which I think coincides pretty much with what has been described here as a feminist policy, feminist foreign policy. Now, these groups are in close contact with right-wing populist parties all over the world. And Elżbieta Korolczuk and I traced these connections. We looked at how what Orban said at a World Congress of Families meeting, what are the connections between Vox, the radical right party in Spain, and the local branches of the anti-gender movement. Of course, we were most closely following the connections in Poland, but there are also connections, very interesting ones, in France, where the religious aspect is obfuscated. The anti-gender movements sometimes seem to be non-religious. Sweden is another example, where the anti-gender movement claims to be defending science against the supposedly religious impact of So we actually have a long section on Sweden because my co-author resides in Sweden. And of course, the religious right and the Republican Party in the United States is another connection, although we were mostly interested in Europe. So what are these links, besides the fact that some of these people are actually the same people, like the representatives of the Hungarian government are actually members of some of these groups. We call the connection an opportunistic synergy. It is a synergy in that they work together for a common goal, which is both, which is viewed as religious by the anti-gender movement, but it is clearly political when it comes into the hands of the of those political parties I've been talking about. And I guess for today's uses, I would say that the overall aim is to destabilize the European Union. It's to make people feel that liberal democracy is a danger to their families, to their normal lives, that the elites, the democratically elected governments are actually enemies of the people. In other words, it's feeding the cycle of breakdown of liberal democracy. But why is it opportunistic? Because neither side is really committed on to the values of the other side. Each side has its own interests. The anti-gender movement wants power. They want to be included in decision-making positions. They want to change the discourse of human rights, so that, for instance, the idea of humanity and human rights includes unborn babies, as they call them, right? So that the anti-abortion, anti-choice movement becomes part of the human rights agenda. And they also want state resources. The more interesting question, perhaps, is why do these right-wing populist parties join hands with religious fundamentalists? None of these parties are religious by definition. These are nationalists, most of them. And they're populists. In other words, their core idea is that they want power, and that the people who are in power are actually, that they are corrupt elites which need to be destroyed and delegitimized. Well, what it seems to us from, and we've been observing this dynamic for several years, is that what the right-wing parties get from the anti-gender movement is an extremely catchy idea. The idea that gender is danger. The idea that parents, for instance, must be mobilized against liberalism. In other words, what they get is an ideology and a thickening of their own weak ideological backbones, because right-wing populism is notoriously thin in terms of ideas. So they get this kind of this set of arguments which create an antagonism for the European Union, which create a sense of anxiety in the population, which drives their electoral efforts, and they get for themselves the label of defenders of children. There's nothing better in times of anxiety than to have that label for yourself, right? To present yourself as the one who will save the children from some evil. So basically, they get a recipe for a moral panic, which gets them to power or makes it possible for them to stay in power, as is in the case of Orban and Kaczynski. So to wrap up, and I would really encourage you to actually follow some of this, the research on this, especially Neil Dada's brochure called "Restoring the Natural Order," which can be downloaded for free, to see, how these people talk, what laws do they specifically want. But the general argument I want to make is that we should not take gender equality for granted as an idea that drives Western European, or more broadly liberal democratic states, because the argument on the other side has been incredibly powerful. One of their main arguments, which I think has managed to intimidate politicians in the West, is that gender is a form of ideological colonization. In other words, the argument from the right wing and from the anti-gender movement is that we should stop feminism and LGBTQ rights as an international agenda because it's a form of colonization. If we allow ourselves to be blackmailed in this way, that will be the end of gender equality as a global dream. And I think it's happening. I think this argument has been effective. So what has happened is that an anti-feminist foreign policy, which is what I think this is, and I'm not an investigative journalist, so I'm not going to tell you what percentage of it is funded or invented by the Putin regime, but based on my research, I can tell you quite a bit is that this policy has been incredibly successful because liberals and Democrats in Western democracies have allowed themselves to be drawn to two very false and very dangerous ideas. The first one I've already told you is that gender is a form of colonization, and that therefore each country should be allowed to have its own gender policy, that women's rights are human rights is actually a kind of dead idea because of the danger that we're imposing our ideas on others. That I think is very dangerous, and I think feminism should not shy away from the status of a universalism in ethical terms. That doesn't mean that it needs to be a robust universalism in political terms, but I think the universalist ethics must be there. And the other idea, which I think is also widespread in manuals, I guess, that we all get to watch occasionally, is that gender is insignificant, that it is, as the ambassadress of Sweden has said, a kind of window dressing, that it's just that these are just cultural issues, that they are insignificant. I think as long as defenders of democracy will allow themselves to be to have that attitude, we will be defeated by the rising right-wing populism and fascism, and Putin will be the beneficiary of that mistake. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Graff, for your presentation. Moving on now to a perspective from Turkey, Professor ZuhalYEETILYURT-GÜNDÜZ from TED University, Turkey. Professor Gündüz is head of TED University's Center for Gender Studies and member of the Women in Foreign Policy Turkey initiative. Professor, thank you for being with us today. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Abramescu, Her Excellency, distinguished guests. It's an honor for me to be here today. And it is a very big honor for me because I was also recommended by very precious Cynthia Enlow, and I was very happy to have your invitation. Thank you very much. I prepared some slides, and I will begin by taking you to Goethe, to the dramatic work called Faust. Very short part of this work is about a speech between two citizens, and one of the citizens says, "On Sundays, holidays, there's naught I take delight in, like gossiping of war and war's array, when down in Turkey, far away, the foreign people are fighting. One at the window sits with glass and friends, and sees all sorts of ships go down the river gliding, and blesses then as home he wends, at night or times of peace abiding." I find this piece really interesting. So there's war down in Turkey, far away, and at home where these citizens live, there is peace, and they are happy to have that peace. So both citizens are not impressed or shocked by war and suffering, as long as that war goes on down in Turkey, far away, and at home they enjoy peace and tranquility. They enjoy that. This is cold-hearted, but much more than that. It is irrational. There is an absurdity in this kind of argumentation that I would like to highlight. I would like to question, how long can there be real peace in one place in the world as long as there is war in other places? How long can there be peace and harmony enjoyed here when there is war elsewhere and when people suffer and die? So as long as there is unrest, violence, military conflict, and wars somewhere in the world, be it in Europe, be it in Middle East, be it in Africa, wherever it is, there can be no talk of peace or even world peace. So I would like to say, no one lives in peace until everyone lives in peace. So let us very shortly look at foreign policy, what foreign policy is, in order to better understand, of course, what feminist foreign policy wants. So foreign policy describes a country's interactions with other countries. It strives to protect national interests, which for realists is very clear, for liberals not that much, but very questionable concept indeed, and guides a country's involvement in international affairs. The problem with this kind of foreign policy or traditional foreign policy is it focuses on the use of military power and also violence to threaten people or to dominate people and nations. So it's built upon the protection and expansion of neoliberal economic practices which deepen poverty, which erode communities and destruct the environment. And women and LGBTQ+ and other marginalized groups are mostly affected by this kind of foreign policy. Because conflicts, economic injustice, and environmental destruction have highest impact on these groups of people. As a standing against this, a new idea evolved in 1994, which I like to highlight. It is based on the Human Development Report of the UNDP from 1994. It brought a new concept of human security. So the old concept of security meant border security, national interests, but human security brought a new vision. It said it demanded safety from chronic threats as hunger, disease, and repression, and protection from sudden and hurtful disruptions in the patterns of life. So for most people, a feeling of insecurity comes more from worries about daily life. And this is human security indeed. And for human security supporters, the realist state-centric definition of security has become outdated because it disregards how much states themselves are sources of insecurity for people. So this groundbreaking people-centric concept of human security changed the view, and it has two goals: freedom from fear, which means protection, and freedom from want, which means empowerment. Let us now look at the basics, at the beginnings of international relations. What was it all about? So when did it begin? International relations has a short history of only a century. The idealists in that time, the liberals, the idealists, were shocked and devastated by the destruction caused by World War I. And they wanted to build up institutions, procedures, practices with which to control or even eradicate war in the international system. So they said, if we come up with knowledge, if we come up with an understanding, then we can overcome wars. So they said the ignorance and lack of understanding was the main source of international conflict. So they built up an academic discipline to study the world of international politics. And the first department of international politics was built in Aberystwyth, Wales in 1919. And the aim of this discipline, this new discipline, was to produce knowledge with which to increase peace. I think this is important to remember and to remind, especially in Manels, when many men experts, so-called experts, speak about strategy and all this stuff without highlighting the importance of peace. So the question that arose for us, of course, was the simple question: where are the women? In international politics, there were so many men, and it was portrayed like a man's world, so that Ann Tickner asked, why are there so few women in my field? And how much does the discipline of international relations reflect women's experiences, women's knowledge, and women's wisdom? Feminist theory met international relations in the 1990s and caused a challenge to the discipline. So now feminists demanded to include gender perspective and women's experiences, and the main question, of course, where are the women? So they aimed at ending the invisibility of women and putting on gendered lenses in all areas of life, society, domestic policy, and foreign policy. So they rejected also the division of domestic and foreign policy because it is mixed up. Both are hand in hand, we can say, and foreign policy cannot be realized in a vacuum without human beings or against human beings. Also, the distinction between high politics, security, military issues, and low politics is criticized by feminists because it's low politics that affects us every single day. So gender, environmental protection, human rights, health, education, migration, population, poverty, and many more are the main topics of domestic and foreign policy and should be considered. And I now would like to highlight some concepts of very distinguished Cynthia and Lowe. Instead of the chessboard, she says, international relations is like a crowded dance floor. I like this a lot indeed. So she says that she prefers the metaphor of crowded dance floor. Sometimes some people are doing hip hop while others are doing waltzes on the same dance floor. So they are competing bands, playing different music. There are people in the gallery who dance and others who aren't allowed to dance, who are supposed to be grateful to be allowed to watch the dancers. And then there are the people who clean the ballroom before and after the dance and who are left outside in the cold or in the heat. So this, I think, captures international relations much more than the chessboard, indeed, which is too easy concept. I had a chance to make a conversation with Cynthia and Lowe. You can find it on this webpage of Welttrends. So she highlights Sweden's Margot Wallström's feminist foreign policy in here with women's rights, human security, and gender equitable political economies. And she highlights the importance of women and knowledge of women, that experiences of women are taken seriously and that it is listened to women's experiences also. So the feminist foreign policy necessitates that social and economic well-being of marginalized individuals and communities are taken into consideration. So we need to rethink the meaning of security from those who are marginalized in order to build a safer, healthier, and more peaceful world for all. The effective holistic feminist foreign policy would necessitate rights-based policies, also intersectional inclusion of women and other underrepresented groups. Then it would demand advancing human security and human dignity, which I find a very important concept. It would include disarmament, demilitarization, and peace building. And it would include economic policies to end poverty and to protect the environment. Unfortunately, this is the view. We see an increase in world military expenditure by regions. I have found data for 2019 brought out by Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. If we have a look at 2020, 2021, and especially 2022, we would see even higher numbers here. What is maybe most shocking is that the 5 largest spenders are United States, China, India, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. And 3 of these countries are the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, who ought to provide peace and security. But they gain from this, they win from this, and they continue this. So with these resources, the world's largest problems could be solved. But instead, new problems are produced, new military conflicts are produced, and new wars are produced. So Again, my sentence from the beginning, no one lives in peace until everyone lives in peace. And I would like to end with a quote from the first president of Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, who said, "Peace at home, peace in the world." And I find this sentence very much connected with feminist foreign policy. So thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gündüz, for your presentation and also for using the word peace so many times in your speech. It's certainly a notion that everyone needs to hear about these days. Moving on to Sweden now, to Ekatherina ZHUKOVA. I hope the problems with the sound are solved by now. Ekatherina is a senior lecturer at the Department of Political Science, Faculty of Social Sciences in Lund University, Sweden. You have the floor. Okay, so the problem with the sound is solved, but I don't think we can hear Ekatherina. I'm not hearing her, maybe.
Maybe a WhatsApp call could be set up somehow. If you write us your phone number, your WhatsApp phone number, we can try to do that. And meanwhile, I can perhaps invite our participants to write questions in the chat section. Okay, I am going to call now by WhatsApp. I think it will take some time, so maybe Ramona Avramescu, you can continue, and then I will maybe connect.
So everyone in the audience, if you have questions for any of the participants, please write them in the chat windows. I was stuck with the last presentation and the word peace, and I was thinking that this discussion is particularly interesting that now when we live extraordinary times and maybe one can say this is no time for talk about feminist policies because war is such a manly field. And I have a question for Ambassador HYDEN, how women can get more involved in this crisis, in solving this crisis that we are living these days. I would go from the photo that you showed us with the negotiation that were only men. How can we go further from here?
Thank you for that question, Mrs. Avramescu. If I had the answer, and if the answer was clear to everyone, you wouldn't have to ask that. But I think it's and this is again the reason why there is the need still to talk about feminist foreign policy and gender equality, because that is not what the reality looks like. So again, obviously, at a certain level, it takes their own governments to make sure that you have equal representation, that you have the people who are relevant, but that they are also representing the population at negotiating tables. So that is one way to ensure that more women would be part of deciding the future of a ceasefire and the continued peace building and democratic society after that. Of course, then it's the work of each one of us to not to hesitate, to take the opportunities that are given, and with the support of women, but also by men, to ensure that we are actually getting jobs and positions where we have an impact, and where we can act as role models on the one hand, but also making the impact on the other side. So there's a lot. I'd say that's the basis. I would have a comment, but perhaps if we are all set up with Ekatherina, I don't want to carry on.
Through WhatsApp.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay,
Thank you.
so I'm going to put the telephone close to the microphone of the laptop. So you can.
Yeah, I can speak. Right?
Yes, please.
Yes. Hello, everyone. And I'm sorry the technical issues. I hope that you can hear me. I have one thing that came to the feminist foreign policy is exactly an opposite policy to what Russia is doing today. So it's a policy of peace. Peace was named. It's a policy of dignity, and it's a policy of cooperation. I'm doing research on existing feminist foreign policies. So I just say a few words. What countries that have adopted feminist foreign policies have in common? And we have 6 countries: Sweden, Canada, France, Luxembourg, Mexico, Spain. Germany was also named, but I haven't studied Germany, so I will just use this 6. So first, all these countries have either social democratic or left-leaning government, meaning that the feminist foreign policy is still an issue of the divide between left and right. And the ideal will be, of course, to break this divide so it becomes so normal, so nobody is questioning anymore what gender is, what feminism is. Then another similarity among all countries is that there is a political will of the leadership, like also the ambassador mentioned. It's a prime minister and it's a minister of foreign affairs who takes the lead and responsibility. Another commonality is the domestic policies on gender equality that have been implemented. In Sweden, the state feminism started in 1970s. However, if we look at Mexico, Mexico is quite the opposite. They use feminist foreign policy to be inspired from transnational ideas, international ideas, and then bring them home. So again, one doesn't have to be perfect at home to wait to implement a feminist foreign policy. One can start with feminist foreign policy in order to become perfect at home. And I will mention 3 more very briefly commonalities. The fourth commonality between all 6 SFP countries is that they all try to use international commitments like Agenda 2030, Sustainable Development Goals, Women, Peace and Security, Resolution 1325, Beijing Platform for Action, all these commitments, and they draw on them to use their feminist foreign policy to implement them. So one can also think as a country, what kind of commitment I would like to implement and connect feminist foreign policy to this commitment. Another interesting issue that is common among all these countries is that feminist foreign policy can be used as a profile issue on the international stage. For example, both Sweden and Mexico got a non-permanent seat in UN Security Council. Sweden was 2017-2018, Mexico is 2021-2022. And they use feminist foreign policy to advocate for issues. And Canada and France use their G7 presidency to do the same. And the final issue, which is very important, is the collaboration with civil society, because it's exactly the bottom-up actors, feminist and human rights organizations, that are pushing issues of justice, to the government. So collaboration between government and civil society. And just one last thing I want to say is that there is no one size fits all, because everyone has to respect their local needs. And say Romania might not have the same budget as France, but it doesn't mean that Romania cannot do anything. One can be like Mexico, be active internationally, be inspired and bring it home, or like Sweden, develop something in home and then show it internationally. Also, feminist foreign policy doesn't have to include everything. One can have feminist trade policy. One can have feminist climate policy. One can have feminist migration policy. One can have feminist humanitarian policy, especially now with so many people fleeing Ukraine. Feminist humanitarian policy is the policy to have. Or one can have a feminist communication policy where one is looking at the language, how we talk about gender in our daily life. And I think I will stop here, so I won't take more time. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mrs. ZHUKOVA. And I'm afraid we are very close to our meeting. The time has flown so quickly. Thank you all ladies for this very interesting discussion, and so for so many perspectives on such important issues. It's particularly interesting and important for me since the public scene is often seized by male voices. I see Ambassador HYDEN wanting to intervene. You have the floor, please.
Thank you so much. I think everyone has things they want to say. I got really inspired by sitting here. I feel it's important to. I want to really thank Mrs. Agnieszka GRAFF for raising the issue of the anti-feminist movement, the anti-feminist foreign policy, as she probably rightly called it. I mean, I think it's absolutely clear that this is happening, and it's not a new thing that has been pointed out. It's something that has been built up over time. As we see the results of what is happening in Ukraine right now, it's not something that was thought of yesterday. It's something that has been built up over the last 15 years or so. And from the Swedish perspective, I just want to say that being aware of this anti-feminist movement, anti-gender movement, is absolutely part of the Swedish feminist foreign policy. And I think it should be part of all countries' foreign policies to know of the actors and know of the methods of these actors. I'm grateful for the heads up and the literature tips that Mrs. Graff gave. Also because we should be aware, of course, that this is part of the ongoing undermining of the liberal democracies that we defend. And of course, it is both shocking and a fact that even within our own European Union, where we have the shared values, we do not have the shared views and values and use of the word gender. So that is a fact, and it's something we need to be absolutely aware of. And we've developed policies of how to counteract this. Not least in multilateral forums, where there will be negotiations on the word gender, or rather ensuring that the word gender is not part of it, or women and the sexual reproductive health are not part of different types of documents. All in all, does this movement mean that we should do less of gender equality? The answer from the Swedish perspective would be no, rather the contrary, because if we allow what we see now, if we allow more of the giving way to might is right instead of a right perspective, then we have indeed lost the security order and the democracy order that we still believe in. So we should be aware of what's going on, and I thank for Mrs. Agnieszka for raising this. I would say it's an encouragement for us to do more, but in the smart way. So thank you.
And now to our host, Professor Popescu, please.
Thank you very much for all these presentations. Each of them made me more knowledgeable. I learned a lot. I will not say anything apart from referring to some of the ideas of our participants in terms of conclusions. So in order to have a feminist foreign policy, we need an ambassador for foreign policy. Of course, we need much more than that, but this is an idea from Her Excellency Therese HYDEN. From our Minister Luminița Popescu, I found out a thrilling, and not a thrilling in the worst way, that 90% of the civilian casualties in wars are women and children. Also from Professor Agnieszka GRAFF, that we need to unite our forces to combat this idea that gender is an expression of colonization. Let me tell you one idea of mine, listening to all these presentations, that it looks like feminism and feminist foreign policy is attempting to spoil interests of the powerful in this world and the powerful seeking gangs in the world. And this is something that we need to be aware of. And not least what our colleague from Turkey mentioned, which is inspired by the founder of the modern Turkey, Atatürk. No one lives in peace until everybody lives in peace. Thank you very much to all of you for the participation. And I am sure that Mrs. Ramona Avramescu is going to tell us a few words at the end, as she is a media person. How does she see this issue now in the light of everything that was said? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you everybody for such interesting presentation. As I said in the beginning, it was really invigorating and inspiring for a news journalist to be part of this discussion in these extraordinary times that we are experiencing, when the public scene is often seized by populists, illiberals, as some of the keynote speakers said here, especially in this part of Europe where we are still fighting lots of traumas and demons and so on. And I found particularly interesting the assessment that the anti-gender politics are somehow connected to the Putin regime, which is certainly an interesting perspective to look into it for a journalist such as I am, especially in this crisis. So thank you everyone for these presentations, for taking the time to share such inspiring ideas. It's been a privilege for me to be here.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Everybody.